Just closing my tabs here. Okay, yes, the recording, it's being recorded, but it's not live on Facebook or anything. So you're welcome to put your videos on. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okie dokes. Here we go. So, welcome to our third class of Secrets of the Bible, iconic stories and mystical meanings and their lessons for life. Just here. Okay. Okay. So as we did in the previous lessons, we explore one of the foundational stories in the Torah. Usually it's a story that we know, but we accept, but we have some questions about it, but we accept it as, for its face value, and we understand that we don't necessarily understand everything, but it's an interesting story that we could learn a lot of lessons from, and we move on. But in this class, we are taking these stories and we're delving deeper into their mystical meanings. And we kind of try to learn and see what we can extract from these stories for our lives in the here and now. So our subject this week is Jacob and Esav. Now, and the stolen blessings, so to speak. So like the first two stories we explored, this raises a lot of eyebrows, this story, and there are a number of mystifying and even disturbing questions about this story. There's a lot of deceit. There's questions about Rebecca and Isaac's marriage. There's a lot of questions to ask on this story. And hopefully at the end of this journey that we're going to take, we'll have clarity and we will be able to really extract lessons for ourselves personally here and now. So in chapter 25, I guess we can just read lesson 3. We have it up on the screen, and it's Jacob and Esav. The epic struggle between the most famous twins in the Bible assumes many forms. The contest between sword and word, between matter and spirit, between self-realization and self-transcendence. We learn that creation itself comes in two formats: a powerful yet unstable world of chaos, and a moderated and focused world of correction or rectification. In every area of life, we straddle both realms and can look into the Jacob and Esav story for guidance in navigating this duality. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 25, describes the birth and the early years of Isaac and Rebekah's twins, Jacob and Esav. So just to reference, we have Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah have a son by the name of Yitzchak or Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah, and after many years of infertility, they have twins, Jacob and Esav. Now, in chapter 26 of Genesis tells the story of the stolen blessings and how Rebekah arranged for Jacob to trick his father into blessing him instead of Esav. And then in chapter 28 of Genesis, it describes what happens after the deception was revealed. So let's read text 1, okay? And basically it sets the stage for our class. After many years of infertility, Isaac and Rebekah's prayers are answered, and they conceive. So Rebekah conceives, but this is no ordinary pregnancy at all. And when I put up text, it's because the text is very, very important for us to read from the Torah to see exactly how the Torah, how Hashem describes the situation. So I'm going to read, it's a long text. I'll try to read it quickly, but each part of the text is integral to our story and to our class. The children struggle within her. We start when she's pregnant now. The children struggle within her, and she says, if so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of God. God said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 kingdoms from your insides will diverge. Kingdom will overpower kingdom, and the elder will serve the younger. Now, this is a prophecy that only Rebecca receives, okay? And in the laws of Nevuah, of prophecy, when a prophet receives prophecy, they are not allowed to repeat the prophecy unless they're instructed to. So this was a prophecy that God gave to Rebecca. Our commentaries say that she actually went to the yeshiva, to the rabbis of Shema and Aver, to discuss this situation, because when we're children, we hear the story this way. When Rebecca was walking past a shul, a baby started to kick. And when Rebecca walked past a church, the baby started to kick. And she was wondering, like, when you're children, this is how they teach you in yeshiva. Like, the mommy's pregnant, the baby's kicking when the mommy walks by the shul, the baby's kicking when the mommy walks by the church. Mommy doesn't know she's pregnant with twins. She's concerned, she's confused. What's going on? What's with this child? She goes to the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, and they tell her that she's pregnant with 2 babies. One wants to go to shul, and one wants to do the opposite. But here, we're actually reading it in the text, and we see that it's literally a prophecy that God said to her. Continuing, her days to give birth were fulfilled, and behold, there were twins in her womb. The first one came out ruddy, his entirety as a hairy mantle, and they called his name Esau. After that, his brother came out, and his hand was grasping Esau's heel, and he called his name Jacob. Esau leaves the birth canal first. Yaakov is holding on to Esau's heel, and hence his name is Yaakov, from Akev, heel. The lads grew up. Esau was a man who knows game and a man of the field, and Jacob was a wholesome man, a dweller of tents. Isaac loved Esau for the game in his mouth, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Okay, now, before we move on to part 2 of the story, let's take a minute to summarize what we just read. From the very beginning, we're presented with this paradox. They're twins, but very different. Esau and Jacob are twins, and which you would think, oh, that implies that there's a likeness, right? They have the same parents, they have the same DNA, and they share the same womb. So wouldn't there be some likeness to them? However, as we read, they differ in every way, physically, behaviorally in their behavior, their characters, in every single way. These 2 children are polar opposites. Now, even before they were born, like I said, the battle begins, and then Rebecca receives advice, and she receives this prophecy that we read. God said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 kingdoms from your insides will diverge. Kingdom will overpower kingdom, and the elder will serve the younger. That's the prophecy. Now, here's a cosmic struggle is taking place in her womb, right? It's no like ordinary sibling rivalry. This is a struggle between 2 nations and 2 kingdoms that will continue for generations, literally throughout history. So this is not just, 2 babies who are very different, 2 children, and we have this story. This story, this part of Esau and Yaakov, or Yaakov and Esau, is pivotal until today. It's 2 nations, 2 kingdoms that are struggling from generation to generation. Kingdom will overpower kingdom. That's part of the prophecy that Rebecca received. Rashi explains that when one rises, one will fall, and it will constantly strive to assert power over the other. And this all began in the womb. From the beginning, Jacob is trying to overtake Esau. Even while Esau is being born, Jacob is holding on to his heel, implying that he was trying to hold back Esau from becoming the firstborn. Okay, he's holding on to his heel. Now, Esau, what does it say about Esau in the text? Esau is a man of the field who knows game. And Yaakov is a wholesome man and dweller of tents. And the text continues to show that the contrast between the brothers include their parents as well. So not only are they different, but here we have their parents taking sides. Isaac loves Esau, Rebecca loves Jacob. So it's obvious why Rebecca loves Jacob. Every mother can tell you that they want their children to be like Jacob. He gave her absolute nachat, right? He was easy to love. He did what he was told. He was a dream child. Every mother's dream, right? Like he did what he was told. He learned. He got good grades. He got good marks. He always listened to his Yetzer Tov, his good inclination. Now, she did receive prophecy, like we spoke, that the elder would serve the younger when she went to seek advice. So she already knew that the elder was going to serve the younger. And this is very important to answer some of our questions later on. Now, Isaac's love for Esau is a bit harder to understand. How does the Torah describe Esau? For the game in his mouth. What does that mean? So Rashi explains that this was the food that Esau would prepare for his father. He'd go out, he would hunt, and he would prepare food for his father. He had a lot of kibud avayim. He had a lot of respect for his father, and he would prepare food for him and feed him. Now, another interpretation that Rashi explains about why Isaac loved Esau is that Rashi gives this explanation. He says Isaac was taken in by the game in Esau's mouth. What does that mean, the game in Esau's mouth? Meaning that Esau was a smooth talker, and he presented himself to his father as a righteous man. Now we know that Isaac was hard of seeing. He was blind. I don't know if he was totally blind, but he was very much blind. And the rabbis tell us that it was because on the Akedah, when Abraham was going to sacrifice him, and he was literally on the altar, the angels cried in heaven, and the tears of the angels fell into Isaac's eyes, and the holiness and the intensity of the tears of the angels later on in life, Isaac, his eyesight was diminished. So he was blind, and he didn't really see all of Esau's antics. And Esau was a smooth talker, and he talked up his dad. Now, there are many questions to pose about the story. So we're going to tackle and understand them later by delving into the soul, right? We talked about the soul of the Torah, the mystical meanings of the Torah. So the inner significance, we're going to kind of delve into the inner significance of what transpired, and everything is going to fall into place. But let's continue reading text 2 of the story. Okay. And it came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were dimmed of sight, and we know why now, because of the angel's tears. And he called his elder son Esau, and he said to him, "Here, please, I have grown old. I do not know the day of my death. Now, please pick up your implement, your sword and your bow, and go out to the field and trap game for me. Make for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me, and I will eat, in order that my soul should bless you before I die." Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau, and Rebekah said to her son Jacob. By the way, notice where it says Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau, and Rebekah was said to her son Jacob. Okay, listen to my voice. To that which I am commanding you, go now to the flock and take for me from there 2 goodly goat kids, and I'll prepare them as delicious food for your father. Delicious food for your father, such as loaves. You will bring to your father, and he will eat, in order that he should bless you before his death. Jacob said to his mother, here, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will be in his eyes as a trickster, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. And his mother said to him, your curse is upon me, my son. Only listen to my voice and go take for me. Rebekah took the desirable garments of her elder son Esau, and she dressed her younger son Jacob, and she dressed the goat kid skins on his hands and upon the smoothness of his neck. He came to his father and he said, who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. Isaac said to Jacob, please approach, and I will feel you, my son. Are you this, my son Esau, or not? Jacob approached his father Isaac, and he felt him. And he said, these are the important words, very popular words. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, for his hands were as the hands of his brother Esau, hairy. And he blessed him. God shall give you of the dew of the heavens and the fat of the earth. Listen to this blessing, okay? God shall give you of the dew of the heavens and the fat of the earth and an abundance of grain and wine. Nations will serve you and kingdoms will bow to you, and you shall be a master over your brothers, and your mother's sons shall bow to you. Those who curse you shall be cursed. Those who bless you shall be blessed. Wow, this is intense, especially to read it in the actual text. I always find reading from the text incredible. Okay, so as we've had in every single class, we've posed the first time, the Garden of Eden had 7 questions. And last week with the Noah's Ark had 4 questions. Today we have 5 questions. And of course, this class has more questions on like a sidebar questions, but 5 large questions that we must tackle. And we need to do this together. Okay, so question number 1 is, what and who are these 2 kingdoms that, according to the prophecy of Rebekah, that Rebekah received, are destined to be engaged in a perpetual struggle? And what are these 2 kingdoms fighting for? Who? What are these kingdoms? What are they fighting for? Question 2. If Jacob was destined to become the firstborn, right? Why wasn't he born first? If he was destined to really receive the blessings, why wasn't he born first? Why create an upside down situation and then force Jacob into a lifelong or even generations long struggle to gain the top position? Why not just have Jacob first, let him get the blessings that he deserves as being the firstborn and move on? Why this upside down situation where Jacob has to go and trick and get to the higher position through deceit? Now, that's the second question. The third question is, why did Isaac favor Esau and wish to give him the blessing? Was Isaac really fooled? Let's be honest. Even though he was hard of seeing, was he really fooled? Couldn't he see what was obvious to Rebekah, that Jacob was the more worthy brother? Seriously, he was one of our patriarchs. Was he so enthralled with the food, the delicious food and the game? Like, what's going on here? 4. And this takes us into the 4th question. So the 3rd question is really, was Isaac really fooled? Why did he favor Esau over Jacob? And then the 4th question is, there's so much talk about food here. What's the significance of the hunted game, delicious food? It says that he asked him for delicious food, and then Rebecca came and gave Jacob delicious food. So what's all about this like delicious food that so endeared Esav to Yaakov? Yaakov asks Esav to bring him this delicious food in order to be blessed. And then Rebecca provides Jacob with a comparable dish in order to steal the blessings intended for Esav. So why does this delicious food play such an important role in the story? And our last question is very obvious. It's the question that we always ask ourselves when we read this Torah portion. Why the deception? What was the reason for the duplicity by Rebecca, and Jacob? What was going on here? Even if there was no other way to ensure that Jacob got the blessings, what is the deeper reason that the blessings had to be obtained by deceptive means? And those are our 5 questions. So let's try to answer some of the questions. So let's start with question 1. Question 1 is, what are these 2 kingdoms that, according to the prophecy that Rebecca received, are destined to be engaged in a perpetual struggle? And what are these 2 kingdoms fighting for? So it's obvious that this saga isn't just about the fortune of 2 brothers. I think we can see that it relates to a larger historic, even cosmic duality that the twin brothers represent. Each one of these brothers represents something incredible. Now, this question has many interpretations. And as you can imagine, there's so many interpretations, but as we spoke in the first class, there's 70 different ways to read the Torah, 70. We're going to look at 4. We're going to focus on 4 interpretations to this question about what is going on with these 2. Why is there a perpetual struggle? Who are these 2 kingdoms, and what are they fighting for? So on figure 3.1, we see a figure of the Esav and Jacob duality. Here you see Esav, here you see Jacob, right? And we can see the different conflicts. We'll go through the first 3 conflicts quickly, and then the meat of our class is really going to focus on the cosmic interpretation. But let's look at the historical conflict, okay? Jacob is the father of the Jewish people, who are named after him, actually, Israel, because later on, when Jacob and Esav struggle when they're adults, his name is changed to Yisrael, Israel. So Jacob is Israel, okay? So Jacob is the father of the Jewish people, Israel. Now, Esav fathered the nation of Edom, okay? Edom is associated in biblical prophecies and in Talmudic and Midrashic literature with the culture and power of Rome. The Edomites were a nation. The Edomites were Rome. So the Edomites were a nation located southeast of the land of Israel. And it was originally conquered by King David, but the Edomites were later instrumental in bringing Israel under Roman domination. And it's interesting to note that King Herod, for example, was an Edomite. So in those days, Israel was larger, obviously, and they were southeast of Israel, and they obviously King David conquered Israel, and then the Edomites were later instrumental in bringing Israel under all of Roman rule, as we know later on with the Second Temple. They ended up destroying the Second Temple, and Rome ruled over much of the land in that area. Now, this is the basic meaning of 2 nations or 2 kingdoms. We're talking about Judea, and we're talking about Rome. Rome is Edom. Now, 2,000 years ago, these 2 nations clashed in cruel and bloody conflict that lasted centuries. In the 1st century BCE, the Romans gained control of Israel, ending the period of Jewish independence under the Hashmonaim kingdom. As we remember, the Hashmonaim kingdom was the kingdom that ruled after the Hanukkah story, when the Jews won over the Romans temporarily, because eventually the Romans did succeed in destroying the Second Temple. But several times the Jewish nation rebelled against the harsh rule of the Roman Empire, and each time the rebellion was crushed, bringing harsher decrees and persecutions on the Jewish people. But yes, there were times when the Jews were able to overcome the Romans, but as we know, eventually they did end up destroying the Second Temple. Now, eventually the Second Temple was destroyed. We're talking about the Second Temple, and hundreds and thousands of Jews are killed and were exiled from our homeland. And at times our religion was forbidden with the death penalty, as we know from the Hanukkah story. So this is really when the Jewish people were dispersed all over. Now, the struggle seems unequal, even though we know that there were times that Judea, the Jews, did overcome the Romans, right? Eventually, they won. So on one side, we have a tiny, powerless nation, homeless for most of its history. And on the other side, we have a vast, powerful empire, which evolved into a global culture. Because as we know, Western civilization is based on Roman civilization. So 2,000 years ago, when these two kingdoms clashed head on, Rome was triumphant, while Judea was defeated, decimated, and exiled. But the Western civilization that we know here and now really stems from Rome, which stems from Edom, which stems from Esau. Okay, we're really zooming out here now. Now, Jews are, as we know, a very formidable force, and we demonstrate that power and influence are not measured by population size, as we know from the story of Hanukkah, a small cruse of oil, a small little nation defeating a large army. So we know that success isn't necessarily measured by population size, wealth, or military might. And 2,000 years ago, after our crushing defeat by Rome, we're still here, right? We're still a formidable presence in the world. One can say that the jury is still out as to which of the two competing kingdoms, Rome or Judea, will prove to be the more dominant influence in human history. But we do know that Rome is very influential because it's Western civilization, right? Now, Judea also brings a lot to our culture. Now, what influences of historical Rome can you identify in American society today? And what influences of historical Judea can you identify in American society today? And which is the more dominant influence in the American society today? So obviously, if we were in person, we would have this roaring conversation. It would be amazing. But since it's Zoom, I'm going to answer some of these questions. Now, what's the Rome influence, as we know, right, is ambition, the quest for power, self-aggrandization, love of luxury, bigger is better, tallest skyscraper, the biggest mansion or monument. It's all about bigger, better, art, culture, architecture, technology, entertainment. So it's all, the Roman Colosseum, imagine that, the Arch of Titus, all that Rome culture brings. Okay, now, what's the Judean influence in our world today, right? Belief in Hashem, right? Belief in God. As we know, Abraham discovered monotheism, right? Our first patriarch. Self-discipline, morality, generosity, right? Tzedakah, chesed, right? Social justice, commitment, mutual responsibility, pursuit of peace, Ahavat Yisrael, all of our mitzvot, all of our midot. That's the Judean influence on our society today. Now, both have a huge impact and influence on the development of human society today. Okay? Rome, Judea. Now, the next level of interpretation to our question number one, which is what are they fighting for and what are these two kingdoms, we can look at the next level of interpretation as, if you think of Rome and you think of Judea, you think of materialism and spirituality, right? Spirituality versus materialism. Jacob, right? Spirituality, and Esau. They represent two world views, two approaches to life, right? What does Isaac say? Isaac says in the text that we read, the voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. The plain meaning of this verse, as we know, is that Esau's confused by the disguise Rebekah created for Jacob by dressing him in goatskin. So he's confused. The person standing in front of Jacob feels like Esau, but he sounds like Jacob. Of course, our sages see a much, much deeper meaning in Isaac's words. And if we look at text 3, we could read, two legacies did Isaac bequeath to his sons. To Jacob, he gave the voice, as it is written. The voice is the voice of Jacob, right? And to Esau, he gave the hands, as it is written, and the hands are the hands of Esau. These are the two duality results in two perspectives of life, right? You have the voice, which is the spirituality, and you have the hands, which is the physicality, it's the materialism. Now, only the material is real. Only that which can be touched, measured, assigned. Okay, so basically what it is that there's two perspectives on life, okay? And that's where the duality is. So one perspective in life is only the material is real. Only something that I can touch, something that I could measure, something that I can assign a dollar value to is real. Anything that I could see, touch, feel, smell is real. Material is real. Everything else is a fantasy. If I don't see it, it's hocus pocus. The second perspective, and the second perspective on life, is only spiritual realities, only ideas and principles and feelings and experiences have true and endearing value. Material things are insignificant. So here we have material, anything I could see, anything I could touch, that's real. And then we have the spiritual, lofty side, which is only ideas, only spirituality, only spiritual realities and principles and feelings have any enduring value. Material things, yuck, they're insignificant, they're shallow, they're lame. And these are the wrestling twins in our daily lives. Two competing worlds, two competing worldviews and approaches to life, each striving to assert its dominance over the other. Now, so Yaakov, like I said, is the voice, the spiritual world of values and ideals, and Esau is the hands, the material world of action and physicality. And yet, on a deeper level, this duality splits the human psyche. Within ourselves, we have two souls. In Tanya, in the beginning of chapter 9, the Alter Rebbe describes this very clearly, and he describes the struggle between the godly soul and the animal soul. And he actually refers to the prophecy that God gave to Rebekah, that kingdom will overpower kingdom. This is where the Alter Rebbe gets this whole idea of the godly soul and the animal soul, as the Alter Rebbe quotes this prophecy, kingdom will overpower kingdom. Why is the nature of the struggle, what is the nature of the struggle between these two souls? Basically, they're self-fulfillment versus uniting with God. And the Tanya explains that the animal soul is the source of our drives for self-fulfillment and self-enhancement. And the godly soul, on the other hand, is the source of our striving it wants to escape the confines of ego and self-interest. And all the godly soul wants to do is to unite with its source, our source, God. Now, these two souls, these two opposites coexist within within each and every one of us, each wanting to assert itself through our intellect, our emotions, and our actions, okay? Each one is trying to overcome our intellect, our emotions, and our actions. And now, for our fourth interpretation to question 1 of our Jacob and Esav duality, referred to back in figure 3.1, okay? So we talked about the history, Rome versus Judea. We talked about the daily life, materialism versus spirituality. Then we went into our internal selves, what we have to deal with, these two forces, self-realization and self-transcendence. And now our class is really going to focus on this fourth interpretation to question 1, the cosmic level. Okay, I need everyone to take a deep breath because we're going to learn a concept that perhaps some may not have heard of, some may have, but even so, it is definitely a cosmic interpretation. So we have tohu and tikkun. You're going to hear these two words a lot in the next 10, 15 minutes. Tikkun and tohu. Now, according to Kabbalah, creation is founded on the dual realities of tohu, chaos, and tikkun, rectification. Now, when you hear chaos, you think of like all negative, but I'll explain. But that's the English translation of the reality of tohu is chaos, and tikkun is rectification. Now, first, God created the tohu reality, but this tohu chaos reality was not sustainable. So then God created the world of tikkun, rectification. So essentially the world that we live in today is a tikkun world, but it also includes elements of the earlier tohu world, as we'll see. And similar to like when we learned about the Noah's Ark, the pre-flood and the post-flood, in the post-flood world, there were still things from the pre-flood world, which is Noah's whole family and all the animals is all from the pre-flood world. Same thing here. Although we live in a tikkun world, we still have remnants of the tohu world. Okay, now, so what are tohu and tikkun? We'll soon read a text that presents what these two worlds or realities, you can call it a world or reality, are. But before we start delving into tikkun, tohu and tikkun, we need to, there's two important points I need to make before we continue on into delving into exactly what tohu and tikkun are. Now, the first point that I want to make is that up until this point, okay, we've been discussing the Jacob and Esav duality in positive and negative terms. Esav is the bad guy, Jacob is the good guy, okay? Judea and Rome. We assume that spirituality is better than materialism and that the godly soul is obviously more notable and worthy than the selfishness of the animal soul. We think of, oh, animal soul, animalistic. That's all they want is physicality and materialism and shallowness. But we'll discover that things are not as they seem, but more on that later. So up until now, good is good, it's in its box. Bad is bad, it's in its box. Esav, bad, red, Hiri, Jacob, man of the 10, Torah, wonderful, tzaddik. Rome, Judea, right? But we kind of have to get away from that and be a little bit more open-minded and realize that things are not as they always seem. Now, the second note that I want to make is that we're not going to cover the entire subject of Tohu and Tikkun. The text we're going to read is very esoteric and includes some Kabbalistic terminology, which we will need to explain before we can understand what the text is saying. Now, the concept of Tohu and Tikkun are big subject matters in Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy, and we're not going to be exploring all of them in this lesson. We're only going to discuss certain aspects of what these two worlds represent, because these hold the key to understanding the Jacob and Esav duality. So there's so much more about Tikkun and Tohu that we could learn, but we're only learning the Tikkun and Tohu to be able to understand the Jacob and Esav duality. Okay, so the first note is that not everything is bad and not everything is good. We have to kind of get away from that. And the second thing is that, yes, the concepts of Tikkun and Tohu are vast, but we are going to kind of hone in to how Tikkun and Tohu relate and connect to the Jacob and Esav duality. Now, with those two notes in mind and points in mind, we're going to read text 4. Okay. And this was written by actually Rabbi Dov Ber of Lubavitch. He's the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he's actually the son of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. Excuse me if I may, I just want to take a drink. Okay, now the Rebbe writes, to understand the root of the difference between Tohu and Tikkun, and how Tikkun comes to rectify and refine Tohu, serving as form to its substance. As is known, the lights of Tohu were extremely powerful and intense. This is the first world. And there prevailed a state of abundant light and scant vessels. Lots of light, and the vessel wasn't able to contain it because it's just too much. Because the vessels were unable to contain the light, they shattered and fell. Now, following the Tohu, right? Following that, the Tikkun reality was made with scant light and abundant vessels. So now there's enough room for the light to contain in the vessels. Now, with the result that the lights are sustained within the vessels. Okay, so God first created Tohu, a world of abundant light and scant vessels, quote. But this mode of existence was not sustainable. Like I said, the light was too powerful for the vessels. So then God created a Tikkun world. What's the Tikkun world? A world of, quote, scant light and abundant vessels. What are lights and what are vessels? What's the Rebbe's comparing lights and vessels? What's going on here? What does it mean when a world has abundant light and scant vessels, and abundant vessels and scant light? Now, in Kabbalistic language, light is the essence of the thing, the pure energy behind it. It's the essence. Now, the vessel is the structure that shapes it and executes it and contains it. So if we look at figure 3.2, it'll show us a few examples of how we can apply this practically. Okay, so if you look at a book, right? So the first thing we need to understand is that every existence requires both light and vessel. One cannot exist without the other. So if we look at a book, right? And the example is book. Ideas is the light, vessels is the word, is the words. Now, a book that has words but has no ideas isn't a book. It's just sheets of paper with nonsensical blotches of ink on it, right? Now, ideas without words is also not a book. So in order for it to be a book, it needs to have ideas and it needs to have words. Okay, if you look at another example of marriage, two people can love each other, but if they're there's no vessel for their love, no interactions between them, no mutually supportive actions. It's just a fantasy. It's not a relationship. A relationship that has no feelings and passion is not a relationship either. So it needs both. It needs the supportive actions and it needs the feelings and passions. Otherwise, it needs the love and it needs the mutually supportive actions for it to be considered a marriage. And so with the other examples, right? Melodies needs emotions, musical notes. A business needs a vision and objectives, and a business strategies. You need both the light and the vessels. Now, the light is not so happy about being put into the vessels because the light feels confined and constricted over being compelled to operate within specific structures and formats. But without its vessel, the light is nothing. As we saw, in the world of tohu, there's a lot of light, the vessel couldn't contain it, and it was not sustainable. Now, on their part, the vessels don't like being agitated by the light either. The light is constantly challenging their boundaries and pushing the vessels, pushing their limits, right? But without the light, what's a vessel? Vessel is just an empty shell. So the bottom line is this. Every existence, especially a complex functioning existence, consists of both light and vessels. And everything is composed of light and vessels. The pure energy of the thing, which is the light, and the structures and mechanisms through which it operates. Now, we have two models, okay? Tohu and tikkun. The difference between these two realities is what? It's the ratio between these two elements, right? Tohu has abundant light, okay? And scant vessels. But tikkun, what's the ratio? Has scant light and abundant vessels. So it's the ratio between these two elements that show us the difference. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of these two realities are as follows. Now, let's begin with the tikkun model, because that is the tikkun that is more aligned with our current world, okay? Because we are living in the tikkun world. Now, tikkun is what? What did we say? Tikkun is scant light and abundant vessels, which means that there are adequate vessels to contain the light, and the light does not overwhelm the vessel. The energy is there, but it is subdued and fully controlled by the structural process through which it operates. So in our example of the book or a relationship, or that we have in figure 3.2, the text of the book adheres strictly to all the rules of the grammar, and the relationship is orderly and tranquil as each party dutifully fulfills their roles in the partnership. The words, the book, it works great together. The ideas are there, the words are there, they're contained in the book. That's great. That's a tikkun reality. Now, so let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of a tikkun reality and advantages and disadvantages of a tohu reality. I'm just making a disclaimer here. This class is going to go beyond 11 o'clock, okay? And I hope that's okay, but it's impossible to learn on this level and this depth in 1 hour. I hope you understand. And I understand if you have to leave. Okay.
I do have
Continuing.
to leave, but I
So,
don't want.
what are the advantages and disadvantages of the tikkun model? Now, the advantages are that everything and everyone operates smoothly, like a well-oiled machine. There is no conflict. Each component knows its place and subjugates its ego and self-interest, for the greater good. A tikkun reality is efficient, harmonious, and productive. That's the advantage of a tikkun reality or a tikkun world. Now, what's the disadvantage? The disadvantage is that it's a static reality. It lacks passion and excitement. While there's growth, there's growth, it's measured, it's predictable growth that does not supersede its course. A tikkun reality never goes into overdrive, never challenges the rule book, never surpasses itself. I guess you could say, I was thinking about it. I'm like, could it be a little boring? I don't know if I want to use the word boring or monotonous or predictable, but it does lack passion, that's for sure. Now, contrasting the tikkun model is the parallel universe of the tohu. What's the tohu? A world of abundant light and scant vessels, lots and lots of light. Now, the structures can't contain the energy. It's too much to handle. The driving energy is constantly spilling over. It's bursting free of the structures that are meant to contain it and direct it. In the tohu reality, impulsiveness overrides long-term goals, and individual strivings refuse to be controlled by institutional norms. I think we all can relate to that, where, you know, you have your opinion and you don't want to like go with the flow, right? That's the tohu in you. Okay. Now, so what are the advantages and disadvantages of the tohu reality? A tohu personality or system is dynamic, it's passionate, it's ambitious, it's innovative, it's always striving for more, overreaching its own limits and the limits of the framework within it operates, always pushing boundaries to grow. It's pushing, wants to grow. However, what are the disadvantages of a tohu reality? It's unsustainable and it's fickle. It lacks discipline, it lacks focus, it's all over the place. Its forces are often at odds with each other, which results in conflict and strife. And the hazards of tohu are that all the instability can lead to a total breakdown and corruption of the system. So on figure 3.2, if we look at the model, we can see some of the examples of what can happen when the balance between light and vessel is one of abundant light and scant vessels. Here, that if a marriage, let's look at a marriage, for instance. Let's look at the marriage. Let's look at a business, and let's look at religion. If a marriage is aflame with love and passion, right? It's all like smoke and mirrors, but short on mutually supportive actions, right? What will this marriage look like down the line? A celebrity marriage kind of comes to mind. You're like, oh, they're all over, and then 18 months later, 2 years later, whatever, you almost even know when you see the headline, like, oh, okay, I know the next headline, So that's a marriage in a situation where a disadvantage to tohu, a business that has a grand vision, but not much of a business strategy, right? What is the possible outcome to that business? Yeah, you got great ideas, but tachlis, what's your business strategy? What are you doing? How are we going to actually implement all these amazing ideas? And the same thing with religion, a group of people that have these lofty ideologies with no rules and regulations. What will this ideology look like a generation later? As we know, I'm sure if we were in conversation together in person, we can talk about all these, ideologies in religion that came to be, and what did it result in? Catastrophe. Now, there's two potential dangers in this tohu model. One is the whole thing will collapse because it lacks the structure that holds it up. The vessel is too much. The marriage will fall apart. The business will go bankrupt, and the ideology will fade away. Now, what's even worse with the disadvantage of the tohu reality is that it will survive. That's the biggest danger, is that the tohu reality will survive and become the opposite of what it was supposed to be. The love in the marriage will turn to, if it survives, the love in the marriage will turn to resentment and animosity. The business will squander the resources of the causes it was created to support, and the ideology will be hijacked to justify behavior that is antithetical to its noble aims and become a force for evil instead of good. Now, that's if the tohu reality actually survives. So the additional disadvantage to the tohu model is that it is prone to corruption and exploitation of evil. Okay, so there we have the advantages and disadvantages of both. Now, let's come back into our lives, the tohu and tikkun in our lives. Now, they both have advantages and some very pronounced flaws, both of them. Now, if you were God, which world would you create? Now, if we were in person, we'd have a conversation. which world would you create if you were God? The tohu world or the tikkun world? Well, according to the text that we read earlier, right? God created both. First tohu, but because the vessels were unable to contain the light, they shattered and fell. Then God created tikkun, an orderly, stable, harmonious world whose energies will not shatter the structure that contain him. Now, if the tohu model for creation is prone to failure, why not just skip the tohu phase and go straight to tikkun? For those of us that were in the Noah's Ark class, we posed that same question again. Like, if the pre-flood world didn't work, why not just go straight to the post-flood world? Why put us all through that? Now, obviously, there are no mistakes in God's process of creation. And if the collapse of Tohu was an accident, it was a planned accident. God wanted a world that would tap into the advantages of both models. So first, God created a Tohu reality, a world of violent passions and unfettered egos. Then God created a tikkun reality, a stable, orderly world with the capacity for self-discipline and harmonious coexistence. So now we have access to both worlds. We can live a life of tikkun, right, stability, and at the same time, we can draw on the powerful forces of tohu, which are present in our reality of remnants of the primordial world, okay? So we can tap into that. We need the stability, but we also need to tap into that tohu world, and we have remnants in this. We have remnants of the tohu world in this world. Now, if we take a look at, we go back to the figure 3.1 of the Esav and Jacob duality, and see which aspects of our existence are tohu realities and which ones are tikkun realities. And we could look at it and say, like, what's my reality materialistically and spirituality and my self-transcendence and my self-realization? We could really look at it and hone it into ourselves. Now, in the Esav Jacob twinship, the wild, untamed Esav personifies the tohu world of powerful passions and few constraints. So Esav is tohu. Now try not to think of Esav, the big red bad son. Think of him as tohu. He's a world of powerful passions. He has few constraints. Jacob, on the other hand, is tikkun. He personifies the wholesome dweller in the tents of learning, the orderly, disciplined world of tikkun. Okay, so now we're kind of starting to answer some of our questions here. We have Esav, who's the tohu, and we have Yaakov, who's the tikkun. Now, in our lives, the passions of our animal souls, which is the uncontained forest of our egos, our unsatisfiable like ambitions, ambitions of materialistic life, are the tohu elements in our lives. Okay, so anytime we have, we're feeling ego, ambitious, enjoying the materialistic lives, that's coming from our tohu. Now, on the other hand, the orderliness and the harmony of spirituality, the devotion and self-interest and self-discipline of the godly soul, these are the tikkun elements in our lives. Now, interestingly enough, because tohu preceded tikkun, we can tap into the advantages of both models, drawing on the powerful tohu elements present in our tikkun reality as remnants of the earlier world, like we said before, like the passions of the light of the tohu are still here. And we tap into those remnants to bring those into our lives. Now, which are the more powerful forces in our lives? The tohu elements or the tikkun elements? We are living in a tikkun world. So which are more powerful forces? So if we look at any highly successful, ambitious individual, okay? Someone who's really, I was just listening to a quote from actually like Steve Jobs, his last speech, which was wow. But I was thinking of him as an example because he was known, if you believe what is written and what people were talking about in terms of his personality, he was wild in his thinking, and he was extremely passionate, but he was quite volatile in his working environment, and yet he was very, very successful. So who are the most successful people you know? Those who are operating out of self-interest, or those who are committed to an altruistic goal? What has produced the most impactful discoveries, inventions, and improvements to human life? The quest for power and success and fame and wealth, or the desire to make the world a better place? And I think the answer is quite obvious. So why is tohu more powerful? We can say, well, that's human nature. Obviously we see that tohu is very powerful. It was so powerful that the world had to be recreated because of its power. Now, thank God we still have some of those remnants, but imagine that tohu in our world of tikkun is more powerful, as we can see when we think about highly successful people, right? So why is tohu more powerful? We can say, well, shouldn't tikkun be more powerful if it's a more altruistic life and more spiritual, more confined, more orderly? So we could say, well, that's human nature. Human nature wants to be successful. In order to be successful, you have to be a go-getter. Now, in Kabbalah, that kind of seems like a lame excuse or reasoning for why tohu is more powerful. In Kabbalah, the answer is never so lame. Everything is traced back to its origins in the divine process of creation. Now, according to Kabbalah, tohu is more powerful because it was created first. There's a Kabbalistic rule of thumb, and I'm quoting, the higher something is, the lower it falls. So example, if a wall crumbles down or wall collapses, the higher stones will fall first, heavier, higher, and then they go down, right? Now, the animal soul and the material world may be, in the format in which we know them, lowlier than the godly soul, but that is because they stem from a higher, earlier link in the chain of creation. Now, this is like amazing stuff, because we think, oh, the animal soul, bad, right? But actually, the idea that the animal soul, the tohu, the light, the vast light, all the passion and all that was created first. And even though it was destroyed, it's so powerful. That's why it's still more powerful, even in this world. Okay? The world of tohu is God's original creation, making it a more primal reality, because in fact, it was God's original creation. So the scant light and abundant vessels of tikkun came afterwards, and they need to contend with the already entrenched model of abundant light and scant vessels. Here we see the duality. Because tohu was created first, tikkun has to contend with this model of abundant light and scant vessels. So when our spirituality struggles to gain ground in our materialistic world, it is battling the status ego, meaning that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to be spiritual in this material world, because the world of tohu was here first. And we have to constantly contend with that to bring out our spirituality. So when our instincts for selflessness, commitment, and peaceful coexistence need to contend with our ego, greed, and animalistic passions, they face an uphill battle against an earlier, more primal, or we could say original self, the way God originally created the world. So this answers question number 2. If Jacob was destined to become the firstborn, Why wasn't he born first? Why create an upside down situation and then force Jacob into a lifelong or generations long struggle to gain the top position? The answer is Esav and Jacob embody the dual realities of Tohu and Tikkun. So the story of their lives mirrors the cosmic sequence of creation. On an earlier powerful chaotic world, right? The earlier, more powerful chaotic world of Tohu, which is Esav, followed by a younger, gentler, more harmonious world of Tikkun, Jacob. And throughout the narrative, Esav is referred to as the Gadol, elder, greater brother, and Jacob is the younger and smaller one. Because regardless of which side comes up on top in the struggle, Tohu reality came first. And it remains the greater reality even when Tikkun gains the upper hand. Remember, we talked about Rome and Judea. Even when Judea gains the upper hand, Rome comes up, right? In the end, right? We don't know what the end is, but we look at history, it seems like, why? Because the world of Tohu, the world of passions, the world of a lot of light was created first. And so Jacob is the one who comes second, but Jacob is always contending with that Esav. And that's why the Yaakov in us, our instincts for spirituality, also face an uphill battle in our efforts to master the more primordial Tohu forces of our internal Esav. We have the Yaakov in us, and we have the Esav in us. And our Yaakov is always trying to gain the upper hand of our Esav. But the fact is that it just seems that the Esav is stronger. And why is that? Because it was created first. And now that we understand that Esav and Jacob embody these two worlds, now both of them embody these two worlds of Tohu and Tikkun. The question is, what are they fighting over? If they both embody, right, these two worlds, right? Why must there be a struggle between the two kingdoms? Why can't they work together? Each of these worlds has advantages, both the spiritual and material, right? So if we have the Yaakov and we have the Esav, okay, why can't they work together? What's the problem? They can bring both the spiritual and the material positives. We talked about the advantages of both, so they could bring each of the advantages, necessary components of God's creation. As the Talmud says, our goal should be to serve God in both your instincts. I'm quoting, serve God with both your instincts, the altruistic self, as well as the quest for self-fulfillment should be incorporated into our mission in life and relations with God, meaning both are positive forces, okay? Both the Esav in us and the Yaakov are positive forces. So, like I asked, why can't they coexist? Why can't these two worlds exist side by side, each fulfilling its role in creation? And this was at the heart of the different approaches of Isaac and Rebekah in dealing with their twin sons. Isaac wanted to bless Esav with the dew of the heaven and the fat of the land. And Rebekah intervened to ensure that Jacob received the blessings. This is a really interesting, we'll get into this later, but it's really interesting because we think that, oh, Jacob stole the blessings. But what we'll realize is that Jacob got the blessings that he was intended to get. Esau was only intended to get the dew of heaven and the fat of the land. But more on that later. To fully understand Isaac's approach to his twin sons' duality, we need to read the text about the stolen blessings. And here is part 3 of the story. We talked about Isaac, we talked about Esav, we talked about Jacob, we talked about Tikkun, and we talked about Tohu. We need to get back to the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, okay? And we have to fully understand where Isaac was coming from and where Rebekah was coming from. We need to read text 5 about the quote unquote stolen blessings. And that is text 5. I'm going to try to read it as quick as possible because I know time is of essence. And it was just as Jacob was going out from the presence of his father that his brother Esau came from his hunt. And he said to his father, my father should get up and eat of the game of his son in order that your soul should bless me. This is Jacob, right? And his father, Isaac, said to him, who are you? And he said, I'm your firstborn son, Esau. Isaac trembled, an exceedingly great trembling. And he said, who then is the one who trapped game and brought it to me, and I ate of it all before you had come, and I blessed him? Also blessed shall he be. Okay, now, you understand what's happening here? He says, also blessed shall he be. Now, as Esau heard the words of his father, okay? So this is Esau coming back, giving the food, and then he's like, well, I already gave the blessings. And Isaac says, also blessed should it be. As Esau heard the words of his father, he cried an exceedingly great and bitter cry. And he said to his father, bless me too, my father. And he said, your brother came with cunning and took your blessing. And he said, is this why his name was called Jacob? Twice he has deceived me. He took my birthright, and here now he has taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered and said to Esau, here I have placed him master to you and all his brothers, and I have given to him as servants, and with grain and wine I have supported him. And for you then, what shall I do, my son? And Esau said to his father, have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, me, my father. And Esau raised his voice and wept. And his father Isaac answered, and he said to him, here, the fat of the land will be your settlement, and of the dew of heavens above. By your sword you will live, and your brother you will serve. And it will be that when you are aggrieved, you will cast off his yoke from upon your neck. Isaac called, okay, so now Rebekah finds out that Esau is so angry over having him, cheated out of the blessings, that he's plotting to kill Jacob. So she convinces Isaac that it's time for Jacob to travel to her hometown, to Haran, to find a wife. Now, Isaac called Jacob and blesses him. Now he calls him back, and he instructed him. He says, arise and go to Padam Aram and take yourself a wife from there, from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother, and the Almighty God will bless you. And he continues blessing him and make you fruitful and multiply, and you will become a community of peoples, and he will grant you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed with you, to inherit you the land of your dwelling, which God has given to Abraham. Now, let's process what we read. Now, many think Isaac wanted Esau to have Abraham's spiritual legacy, the covenant that God made with Abraham and the special blessing he blessed him with. However, that would mean that if Rebekah had not intervened, the three patriarchs would be Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, instead of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So clearly, the blessing of Abraham was meant to go to Jacob. But if we read the text closer, it tells a different story. Let's take a look at the text. What is Isaac's first reaction when he realized that Jacob tricked him into giving the blessings? He trembles a great trembling, and then he declares, also blessed should he, Jacob, be. So after he finds out that Jacob tricked him, what's his reaction? Physically, he trembles. But then what does he say? He says, also blessed should he be, Jacob. And Esau begs for a blessing. Bless me, father. And then he says, have you not reserved the blessing for me? Esau says. And Isaac says, I gave him everything. The dew of the heavens, fat of the land, and mastery over his brothers. And then Esau persists. Have you only one blessing? Because Esau suspects that Isaac, in fact, does have a blessing for him. So Isaac gives Esau part blessing. Jacob already has the dew of the heavens and the fat of the land. So Esau can also dwell there under Jacob's rule. Jacob has been made master, but under only certain conditions. When Jacob will fail, when the Jews will fail to exercise his or their mastery in a proper way, Esau will be able to cast off his yoke. Okay, fine. What happens next? After Isaac blesses Esau, he blesses Jacob again, like I just read, and he gives Jacob Abraham's blessing. So Isaac did have another blessing reserved after all. And that's why Esau suspected this, and then that's why he kept on persisting. So the entire drama over this stolen blessings is over the dew of the heaven and the fat of the earth. Everything else we know, it's obvious that was going to go to Jacob. But the dew of the heaven and the fat of the earth, part one of the blessing, that's what the drama is over. So nothing at all about the blessing of Avram that we just read, the divine promise of the land of Israel and becoming God's nation, and as many as the stars in the sky and the sand in the earth, on the ground, on the shore. None of that was meant for Esau. We're talking about the dew of the heaven and the fat of the earth. So it's obvious that Isaac intended all along to give these spiritual blessings to Jacob. The only thing he wanted to give to Esau was the mastery of the material world, the dew of the heaven and the fat of the earth. Now, so the disagreement between Isaac and Rebekah was over which brother should be given the physical blessings of power and materialism, never about the spiritual blessings of Abraham. And now we're ready to answer question number 3. Why did Isaac favor Esau and wish to give him the blessings? Was he easily fooled? Couldn't he see what was obvious to Rebekah? That Jacob was more worthy? He was more of the worthy brother? Now, Isaac saw the real Esau. Esau had tremendous potential, right? He was the Tohu. He had the light. He was the son who embodied the world of Tohu with its lofty potentials, powerful potentials. And this is the deeper significance of Isaac's blindness. He was not distracted by the external form of things. He wasn't distracted by Esau's physicality, his roughness, right? He saw everything in terms of its pure essence. Isaac, by the way, was the only patriarch who never left the land of Israel. He lived on a very lofty plane. Abraham wasn't born in Israel. Isaac was born in Israel, died in Israel, never left the land of Israel. Jacob left the land of Israel. Isaac was a very, very, very lofty spiritual individual. He only saw the good. So even though we look at Esau as the negative, he saw the good in Esau. He saw the raw animalistic passions of Esau for their true purpose, that these passions, man of the field, cunning hunter, to be directed towards the positive, godly aims. Esau could have taken his animalistic passions and his just desire to succeed and hone them into godly aims. He also knew the nature of his younger son, Jacob, and he knew that Jacob embodied the structure and focus of tikkun, the vision provided by spirituality, selflessness of the godly. So he saw Yaakov, the good in Yaakov, but he also saw the good in Esau. So Esau's plan was this: give each of the brothers the resources to fulfill their role. If this one's potential is this, give him this. If this one's potential is that, give him that, right? He was, the fat of the land, the dew of the heavens. Let's give that to Esau, right? Now, his plan was very altruistic, right? And he was going to give the brothers their resources to actualize their potential. Now, Esau, given political power and the blessings that would unleash material abundance, and Jacob, given the spiritual blessings to fulfill his role in the twinship of worlds, so to speak. So this also answers our fourth question: what is the significance of the hunted game and delicious food that so endeared Esau to Isaac? Why does this delicious food play such an important role in the story? The meaning of delicious food is not actual food. We're talking about material blessings. Isaac knew that Esau was a master hunter in the field of materialism, and he intended for Esau's blessings to transform and bring pleasure to God and fulfill the divine plan in creation. And that was correct. He knew that Esau was equipped to transform these raw resources, right? The land, the dew, into delicious food, i.e., material blessings, and use those blessings in the service of God. So Isaac was just only looking at Esau's potential. It was only because Jacob was able to produce such physically satisfying, delicious food that his mother helped prepare, that he was able to elicit from Isaac the blessing of the dew of the heavens and the fat of the earth. Because Jacob was also able to, because he has both in him, he was also able to prepare delicious food, right? He was able to get the blessing of the fat of the earth and the dew of the heavens because he demonstrated the potential to be able to produce this delicious food. Now, Jacob could have brought Isaac the most lofty and amazing spiritual gifts that would have earned him the blessing of Abraham, not the mastery of the material world, which Isaac had earmarked for Esau. What if Esau had gotten the first set of blessings? What would happen? Our mission in life and even the very function of the Torah would have turned out very, very differently. It's not that Esau would have been granted the spiritual blessings of Israel. That role would have been given to Jacob, as we learned. That for sure would have been given to Jacob. What would have happened if the material world and the spiritual world would have remained two completely separate realms, each entrusted to another of the two brothers? Neither world would have had any real power over the other. And in text 6, it describes what would have happened had Rebekah not sent Jacob to receive the material blessings from Isaac. And this is, see, Rebekah had the prophecy, so she had much more insight. And what's interesting is, as we know, as women, we do have a sixth sense. A situation can be presented to us, and we just know how it's going to play out. And the men are like, really? Yeah. This is like that Rebekah moment where we know she had a prophecy. So she already knew that the younger was going to rule over the older. She knew that. So now let's read 6. Jacob, and this is from the Alter Rebbe, Jacob is the realm of holiness. Without all this, he still would have received all the supernal energies. But the first set of blessings granted him an increase of powers from the highest levels to obtain much grain and wine, referring to the laws and stories of the Torah that became embodied in material garments and in the actions of mitzvot. However, had Jacob not received these blessings, the power of Torah would have extended only to the spiritual realm, meaning spirituality and physicality would be separate. It would not be together. It was only, so basically, text 6 describes what would have happened if Rebekah had not sent Jacob to receive the material blessings for Isaac. In other words, if Jacob would not have received the first part of the blessings, the Torah would have had no influence on the material world. It would have been an exclusively spiritual program for life, and the material world would need to regulate and properly direct its energies on its own. It is only because Jacob, who is the embodiment of Torah, received Esau's blessing, the dew of the heavens and the fat of the land, that the Torah is actually able to sanctify material life. It was because Jacob got both blessings that we're able to lift up the Torah. We're able to live a spiritual and material life together. So why didn't Rebecca like Isaac's plan? What is wrong with the harmonious partnership of materialism and spirituality? You go your way, I'll go my way, live and let live, kind of like, two separate, when I want some spirituality, I go, but I live in a material world. Because it couldn't work in a perfect utopian world. This idea of being separate, Esav having the material, and this utopian idea of it being separate, it couldn't work in a perfect utopian world, like the world of the Garden of Eden, as we discussed in lesson 1, right? What happened? It needed to be recreated. Isaac's plan of being separate, right? Of giving one son the spirituality blessings, the other son the physical blessings, couldn't happen in this world. Maybe it could have happened in the Garden of Eden, in a utopian world, but it could not work in a world that is free. It could only work actually in a world that is free from evil, or at the very least in a world in which the boundaries between good and evil are clearly delineated. But in our present world right now, right, the post-Garden of Eden world, this plan would not work. In the post-Garden of Eden world, a material world that is ruled by materialists will not rise to its true purpose, but will descend into corruption. The animal soul, ruled by the animal soul, will not build a godly world of holiness and goodness. But what will happen if an animal soul takes over an animal world? There's no spirituality. It'll just end up in corruption, a world of selfishness and violence. Now, Rebecca was able to see both sides of Esav. She saw Esav's corruption. She saw that, and this really goes back to the idea of free choice. Esav had both in him. He did not make the right choice. And Rebecca saw that Esav's choices. Isaac saw Esav's potential. She saw that where he was heading, he was descending into a life of evil, murder, rape, and thievery, according to Rashi. Rashi describes Esav's antics. And Isaac, on the other hand, still believed that Esav could be redeemed by showering him with blessings from his supernal origins. And Rivka understood that these blessings would only empower Esav's corrupt behavior. He had enough from the materialistic world. You don't have to bless him with more. He's tohu, he's filled with that. He's overflowing. Don't give him more, because if you give him more, it's going to be absolute corruption. So going back to our analogy of a business operating in tohu model of abundant light and vessels, it's that same idea, that it's the examples that we were giving with the business, that feeding a business that's not following a plan is just creating a more dysfunctional business. So Rebecca contrived to have Jacob obtain mastery of the material world, because she understood that tohu, chaos, is only redeemed when Jacob is the master. You can't give Esav more tohu. He's overflowing. Got to bring that tikkun to take the remnants of the tohu to be able to actualize the good parts of Esav. So she dressed Yaakov up in Esav's clothing, gave him delicious food of the material world, demonstrating that Jacob was capable of playing that role, because she understood that the powerful resources of tohu can only be redeemed when Jacob, tikkun, the godly soul, spirituality, is made the master of Esav, the tohu, the animal soul, materialism. Yes, the two brothers can join forces, but only when the elder will serve the younger. only when the leadership role is in the hands of Jacob, not Esau. Now let's apply this to our lives. We can view Kabbalah as esoteric, fascinating to delve into, but of little significance in our lives. The truth is, the deeper we delve into the stories of the Torah, the more relevant they become. Take the story of Jacob and Esau. As long as we see only the surface of the story, it remains just that, a fascinating story about two fascinating characters who lived thousands of years ago. Of course, there are always lessons to be learned from the story, but that is as far as it goes. At the end of the day, there are events that happened to people many years ago. But when we uncover the story within the story, we discover that this is the story of our lives. We all have a Jacob and we have an Esau in us, and each is vying for to be supreme over the other. And we are each presented with two approaches to the struggle of Isaac and Rebekah. We have two approaches to the struggle that we have within us. We could take the Isaac approach, or we could take the Rebekah approach. We each have a Tohu personality and a Tikkun personality within us. One strives for materialism and self-fulfillment, and the other a yearning for spiritual life, for structure, for stability, a recognition that we exist to serve goals that are greater than ourselves. And the Torah presents us with Isaac's way and Rebekah's way. And you know what? Both are necessary. Like Isaac, we need to recognize the vast potential of the Tohu in ourselves. And like Rebekah, we need to understand that in order to properly utilize our Tohu potentials, we have to place our Tikkun self firmly in control of our lives. We need to internalize both sides of Isaac and Rebekah's arguments. And this brings us to our final question. Wow, this is a long class. Why the deception? What was the reason for the duplicity by Rivka, by Rebekah and Jacob? Even if there was no other way to ensure that Yaakov would get the blessings, what is the deeper reason that the blessings had to be obtained by deceptive means? Now, practically, there's no other way to prevent the cosmic catastrophe that would have happened had Esau been given the absolute mastery of the material world. Disaster. This prophecy, the elder will serve the younger, that Esau will serve Yaakov, was only given to Rebekah, like I mentioned before, not to Isaac, and she was not permitted to share it. Like I said, a prophecy can only be repeated if God says you can repeat it, if the prophet is instructed to share it. So she knew that the spiritual must rule over the material world. Isaac, on the other hand, represents the pure vision of the perfect world that existed in the Garden of Eden. And it's crucial for this perspective to be preserved, even though it's not yet possible to implement it in our still unperfected world. So the idea of Isaac's utopian world is wonderful, and we shouldn't rid of it. It's very important to have it, but it's not just that, because that world cannot exist in this world. We need both. Therefore, the only way for Jacob to receive from Isaac the dew of the heaven and the fat of the land, part of the blessing, was for Isaac to believe that he was blessing Esau. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. And it was only Rebekah who came and said, oh my gosh, disaster if Esau gets it. So however, the deception, did have repercussions later on in their lives. And we'll learn that in another class. Having said that, there are times when a certain course of action is unavoidable. And it's even the right thing to do under certain circumstances. But so now that we understand where Rebekah was coming from, and we understand the dualities, we understand Tohu and Tikkun, we can understand, because Rebekah had that prophecy, she was really able to take control of the situation. Now, on a deeper level, the reason that Jacob was compelled, now this is like, whoa. So I know it's the end of the class, but just to share this, on a deeper level, the reason that Jacob was compelled to assume a dominant role in the material world contrary to his true nature, goes back to the deception of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, which resulted in the world becoming a mishmash of good and evil, no more utopian world. It was therefore inevitable that as this cosmic drama of Jacob and Esau's lives played out, the circumstances would dictate that Jacob receives the blessings only by a parallel act of deceit in disguising himself as Esau, similar to the way the snake disguised himself to get Eve to eat from the tree. Now let's just read text 7. Jacob's cunning was necessary in order to correct. This is from the Alter Rebbe. Was necessary in order to correct the sin of the tree of knowledge, which also came about through the cunning and enticement of the serpent, and which caused the coarsening of all the worlds and the intermingling of materialism and spirituality. To rectify this, Jacob turned the tables, drawing down spirituality and supernal power into the material world. Now, it goes into, there's a lot that it can go into about reincarnation, that Yaakov was the reincarnation of Adam and Rebecca was the reincarnation of Eve, but that's for another conversation. So just to wrap this up, every time we interact with the material world, we reenact the drama of the stolen blessings. We become a Jacob who dresses in the clothes of Esau in order to obtain the dew of the heavens and the fat of the land. In order for us to mix the spiritual and the physical, we have to look like the Esau, right? In essence, we are spiritual beings, but our task in this world requires us to pursue material success. And even, yeah, it's okay to be passionate about your material success, but this is the catch. The catch 22 that we face in our lives is to do good. We need to succeed in our interactions with the material world. And in order to succeed, we need to immerse ourselves in that world and even care about material success. But surely we are supposed to care about loftier things than money and material achievement, right? But it's about our motivation. Where does your motivation lie? Meaning, is it, we need to dress in Esau's clothing, but we also need to remember that we are Yaakov, that this is only a disguise. All this materialism is a disguise, and it's okay to enjoy it, but it's a disguise. It's not who we really are. We have an ulterior motive. Our purpose, what's our ulterior motive? And we always have to have that. Our purpose in everything we do is to utilize these resources to make our world a holier world for God to reside in, to make a dira betachtonim, a dira, like a place for God to dwell. And the only way God will dwell in this world is spirituality. And so, yes, we have to enjoy the material world, but also realize that material world is only the means to the end. Our motivation in this world is to rectify, right? The tikkun, we have to rectify the tohu, and we have to rectify the tohu, which is the materialism, and use materialism as a means to get to spirituality and make this world a better, more holier, more loftier place for all of us to live in, and especially for God to dwell in. So, my apologies if I, went 45 minutes over, but I would say like a half hour over. But in order to understand these concepts and to really internalize them and have them really affect our lives going forward past this class, we really needed to take the time for this. So thank you so much. If anyone wants to stay on, if anyone has any specific questions, feel free. Anyone have any comments, please, you're welcome to unmute your audio. Let's see here. Let's see here. Oh, it looks busy. Please get a copy. Okay. It's like the unbridled feminine polar and the focused masculine. Okay. I have to leave, but okay. That was well worth the time. Good. That's okay. Thank you. You're welcome. Any questions? Please unmute your. No? Anyone have anything to share? Okay. Well, thank you. I wish we could learn in person, and I hope the concepts were understandable. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really, Aline. It's a lot, but I think it's totally attainable. So if anyone has any questions, if you want to voice message me, if something comes up later, like you have like a delayed reaction to the class and a question pops in, please, I will try to answer it to the best of my ability. Lots of love. Thank you for joining in, and Shabbat Shalom. All the best.